Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and warm welcome also to those people tuning in this evening from home. For anyone who doesn't know me, I'm James, and I'm the Chief Executive and Artistic Director here at Wiltshire Music Centre. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome to the stage two performers who are not in any way unknown to us here at the Centre. Particularly Cordelia played a wonderful recital earlier in the year, and I think Tamsin, you were here last in 2018, giving us a programme. So welcome back. But we've never seen you playing together. So just to get us going this evening, when did you first meet? Perhaps Tamsin, you could tell us, when did you first meet?
We actually met, was it about a year before the pandemic? Was it in 2019? I can't remember.
If you say so.
You were about to have your second child.
Yes.
That's when we met, I think.
Yes.
And we sort of began talking, and we found that we sort of shared a lot in how we thought about music. And then you invited me to join you for some concerts of which this is one of them. And of course, it was all very much delayed with the pandemic.
Yeah.
And lots.
It's been very nice actually, because we met actually socially originally, and it was a very natural sort of development of a friendship and, very rewarding professional relationship. But yes, it's still this is a new partnership, so it feels quite exciting.
Well, it's always very nice when it starts with a friendship. Let's hope that always continues. So in terms of your kind of do you have lots of duo partners? I mean, you must play with lots of orchestras. I know, Tamsin, you're recording so often with big orchestras, but do you have lots of kind of chamber music partners or duo partners?
Yeah, I have played a lot over the last 10 or 15 years with Hugh Watkins, who's also a wonderful composer.
He was here only a week ago.
He was here only a week ago. And he's someone that I've worked a huge amount with, and recently premiered his new sonata at Wigmore Hall. And James Bailey, who I was here with last. We did a big project of the complete violin and keyboard works of C.P.E. Bach. And he's a great friend as well. And of course, I've also for the last 7 years played in the Albion Quartet, of which I'm a founding member, so they're my main string chamber music partners, but I've always had quite a number of different chamber music partners for different kind of mediums. And I think in terms of what Cordelia and I are sort of really interested in exploring in music at the moment, it's a very kind of natural progression for us to start playing together and exploring the type of repertoire that some of which we're presenting tonight.
You can always learn different things from different partners, of course. It's so different, it's such a completely different experience to play with one person compared to another person. And you could never do every concert with one partner, I don't think, because you wouldn't have time unless that was if you only played in that one duo. But otherwise, I think, we're both playing with other people, but this feels good, doesn't it? It feels like a good match.
It's very exciting. Yes, it's very exciting.
Well, you want the different musical influences, impulses and challenges, presumably. I mean, when you're looking at a score, you can't agree on everything, can you? There'll be things that you want to do slightly differently, and presumably you negotiate that as you're kind of working through the rehearsal process.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting, actually, the rehearsal process itself, because different people approach that so differently. So not only in terms of the amount of rehearsal some people like to do, but also the approach to it. And I'm a real believer, and I always come back to this as well, that you rehearse in order to have freedom, not that you rehearse to make decisions. So to build a kind of much bigger structure, the foundations and the walls, and then to build the trust so that within that, essentially the story that you want to tell with the music, but exactly how you tell that, you'll discover it together afresh. So working to have that sense that each performance is a fresh creation, I think is so important, and something that we can never lose sight of, because that cannot be recreated. Everyone's so obsessed with recording, and I think, particularly with the pandemic, we've really been reminded that so much is lost when you don't have live performance, because that can only be created that one time in that situation with the people that are there to listen, and they're all part of it as well. The audience is part of it, and it's not something that can ever be repeated. And that's kind of the beauty of a performance art, which of course music is, that sort of ephemeral quality. And I think it's important to really cherish that.
So you never want to feel like you're recreating something that's already been decided in advance. And I don't know if Tamsin agrees with this, but for me, what's been so exciting and inspiring about our work together over the last year or so has been, I feel that we're both approaching this as a lifelong, something that will grow in many years to come. And so we're setting these foundations of having a connection, a strong connection where we are feeling almost as one and listening, the kind of level of listening to one another, whereby you can then have this extreme freedom in the moment of the performance to react to what the other one is doing and feeling in that moment, rather than kind of deciding what it's going to be like. And that's been very exciting.
It's absolutely wonderful to describe it like this, because you're really letting us into it's a very intimate place, isn't it? The rehearsal space.
Yeah.
And then you take it into a public place where you share it with an audience. But of course, the audience is so important. We say that a lot here. And of course, we're lucky to have a very generous and wonderful audience here that know what they're listening to. But it's such an intimate process. And just before we turn to the music, I'm dying to hear your thoughts about the program tonight. When did you start the rehearsal process, and how much did you prepare ahead of it? I mean, you learnt the notes and you knew when you were going to, the various, presumably you worked out quite a lot before, but how much did you leave to the start of the rehearsal process, and how much did it change as you went through? And presumably you're still on that journey.
I think this is a question that I get asked a lot, and I especially get asked it a lot with a quartet. And so we first aired some of this program last January, and I think we rehearsed it first a few weeks before that.
We rehearsed, I think, before Christmas, and that felt like very much a first outing. It was to see how it felt, see how we performed together, and just give us something to kind of work from almost.
Yeah. And then for this kind of patch of work, we started at the beginning of September, I want to say.
Yeah. But obviously in that time, we'd both been, what we'd worked on previously was kind of developing and, doing things by itself almost. Yeah. So it's not like we didn't do anything in the whole of those months, but then we started properly rehearsing in September.
Yeah, the brain has a sort of magical way of working on its own. And also I think is so much about, especially, these big works like the Schumann Sonata, it takes time to just internalize it. And actually there's no substitute for just spending the time. There's no cheating time. For sure. And actually living with it on stage as well. And there's no way around that. You can't speed up that process. The first performance is going to have, a very different feeling from the second or the fifth or the 10th or the 100th performance. And it's not that one is necessarily better than the other, but it comes from a different perspective.
Well, I think you're both telling us something, that art never stands still, and neither should it, right? So just thinking about the program tonight, I'm really looking forward to this. I think it's a real journey that we're going to be going on tonight. And I really want to just hear how you conceived it, because there are so many links and joins in this program. So the first half, where we balanced the Bach with the Pärt, both very simple on the face of it, but both very complex underneath the bonnet, as it were. So what is it about those works that you really wanted to put next to each other? Cordelia, perhaps you could start.
Yes, I am very interested in the way that Bach and Pärt, although they're 300 years apart, are both writing, as you say, what sounds very simple in a way, because it has this unity and purity of expression. But actually, the way that is created is very complex and almost mathematical. And the method of composition which Arvo Pärt created, really, which is completely unique to him, it's called tintinnabuli. named after bells, which he was very inspired by. And the idea of this method is that you have two, in its most basic form, you have two voices, one which is either a rising or a falling scale, and one which is a triadic, so that means da, 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 that kind of shape. And they interweave to make one melody. That's the foundation of the method, but then it can be made more and more complex by the number of voices that you have. And so I was very interested in the contrast between this approach and the approach of Bach, which in the contrapuntal style, you have two or three...
The one where there's lots of melodies going on all at the same time.
2 or 3 independent voices, which maybe imitate one another, they respond to one another, they maybe reflect one another, but they interact and transform one another, but they always remain distinct. So that's the crucial difference between the Bach and the Pärt, is that in the Pärt, the voices are coming together to make one, a unified melody. So I was very interested to contrast these styles of music in one sequence, and I do think that they make quite a wonderful, uplifting sequence together.
I think it's extraordinary.
And we're exploring also the 3 voices in the piano inventions with the 3 voices of the violin and piano duo, where you have the 2 hands of the piano and the violin, so they would be your 3 voices. So there's all sorts of connections.
I completely agree. It's as if these works were always meant to be put together in a strange sort of a way. Now, in terms of your approach to it, Tamsin, just in terms of sound quality, what, in terms of the sound you want to make for a piece of Bach and the sound you want to make for in the Pärt works, are you changing anything, or are you actually going for something that transcendental, slightly translucent? How are you changing your sound between those 2 pieces?
So I really think that for almost every composer and almost every work, you're sort of looking for a different sound world, certainly for every composer. And of course, we're playing Bach on modern instruments, but to an extent, it's also informed by my sort of personal research of playing gut strings and with a Brock bow, and knowing what the other possibilities are and the kind of different sounds, textures and articulations that can come from the earlier instruments, but then trying to take that into a more modern context, because, as I said, we are on modern instruments, and I think it's trying to find the balance between those 2 things. I think for me it's very important that in Bach you can always hear everything, so there is a kind of transparency that exists, and yet it should be just as full of emotion as the Schumann or anything else that we play. And we've worked on the sound in the Pärt as well over the last months in trying to find
something as simple as vibrato. Are you using the same kind of vibrato for both pieces, for example?
I'm not. And I'm not in the Schumann or the Debussy either.
This is something that is really fascinating to me as well from a pianistic point of view, is how when you play each different composer, it's almost like the instrument is a different instrument because of the way that you're using...
I'm so glad you think that.
Because of the way that you use the expression and the way that the composer uses the instrument in order to express what they are trying to get across. And it really did completely... the experience of playing the piano in this Bach sonata, when I compare it to playing the piano in the Schumann or in the Debussy pieces, it's completely different. It is as if you're playing a different instrument.
I completely understand what you're saying. Now, conscious of time, moving to the kind of the other part of the recital, we get, I think for me, a very different flavour, a pure romanticism. Suddenly we go from a relatively kind of refined, delicate, transparent kind of world into kind of full-thrust romanticism. So I know there are various links you wanted to explore around the kind of Bach idea, because of course Schumann himself was a great Bach lover and a historicist and refers to Bach in many of his works. But going from this kind of sense of tranquility and I think, almost a meditative first half, where I think you will really experience a kind of... Are you going to play without applause, by the way? Or are you planning to play all the way through just out of interest?
We were thinking that maybe after the Bach sonata, we could have a break and applause and just, a breath.
Yes.
And then the following sequence, which is the Bach inventions and the Pärt pieces, that would run as one sequence, because they do flow one to the next in terms of the key structure and the mood.
It certainly does. And I mean, quite from the fact, when I first saw this program, my eyes lit up, because you very rarely hear this sonata. This Schumann sonata is absolutely wonderful and so little played, it seems to me. But anyway, so what is it we're aiming for in that Schumann, and what changes in terms of the kind of story of the program? Perhaps Tamsin, you could take that one.
Sure. I think that this was a sonata that I really wanted to play, and Cordelia is you have such affinity with Schumann, and perfect person to explore it with, because as you say, it is little played and it's very challenging. I think Schumann is always very challenging. It seems really easy at first, and then you realize that it's the opposite of that, and then the more you get to know it, the more there is to discover, and it's so personal in its writing. And actually I find it much more challenging than Bach or Haydn or Mozart in terms of the sound world, because they would have still been on gut strings and a classical bow essentially, and yet going towards some romanticism and the type of portati, so different kinds of slides, different ways of using expression. And I think in a way I miss the gut strings in some ways more in the Schumann than I do in the Bach. And that's something that I've always found a great challenge, also in the piano trios and the quartets. But this Schumann's quite unusual in that it doesn't actually have a huge fugue in it, but it has certainly so much tenderness for a piece which is normally in the minor, and it does start extremely dramatically, and of course there's a lot of yearning, and Schumann's kind of working things out. There's such incredible tenderness and love in it, and beauty.
And lightness as well, that you don't necessarily see at first glance.
I think that's also to do with the instrument, because often Schumann's parts are quite overwritten, but certainly before Clara got to them, they were extremely overwritten, and then overmarked. That's true.
Yeah,
that's true. And overmarked also, and then it's peeling those layers away and really understanding. I mean, again, like reading a book, like learning to tell the story, trying to understand what he's really getting at. And I think if you think of someone like Beethoven as a kind of great philosopher, composer, I think Schumann is, the most intimate, the opposite of that. It's like the composer of like our most intimate relationships. That's what he writes about. And
our most private thoughts as well. And I think that's another challenge about Schumann, is sort of picking up on what Tamsin already said, that there's so much in the music, so many twists and turns and momentary feelings, and things change in the space of a bar, and it can, there's so much there, so much in the score, and the real challenge and the joy and the excitement is to somehow find what is the true nature or the true center of all of that, and distill that into something that is true to Schumann's, soul. And that is why I get such pleasure from playing the music, because there is that challenge, but then when you do find, what you're searching for, it's a moment of just a kind of bliss in a way, musical bliss.
Well, it's limitless music, isn't it? There is no end point to that kind of conversation you can have. Unfortunately, there is an end point to this one. I promised we're going to get to, we're going to let our artists go and have a bit of a break before we say goodbye to them this evening. But just wanted to say a huge thank you. It's really, I feel we're just starting to scratch the surface here, but we could start talking for hours and hours. But you've talked so beautifully about, your approach to the music and how you understand it. And it's a real insight for us. So I hope you have a wonderful time. Please enjoy your recital this evening. I know we will. So ladies and gentlemen, please would you help me to thank the artists for this brief concert.